All right, before I let these gentlemen introduce themselves, the one thing I want to say is we introduced a lot of amazing VIPs today. The thing that excites me about this panel is that this is really where, in my humble opinion, the rubber meets the road. The governors and deputy governors and directors of payments can come up with the most amazing policies that say this is what it should look like. These people are responsible for actually putting that into practice. And one of the things that we're trying one of the main challenges we're trying to deal with in Mojaloop is that it's a great vision to have everybody in the country included in your national payment system and to reach the last mile. And on top of that, give that to people for a very low price, potentially even free. However, reaching the last mile is incredibly expensive. Scale is incredibly expensive. So how do you balance the fact that you're saying, hey, we want you to reach everyone and do this incredibly expensive thing, and then we want you to give it away for free, and we're not going to support you with financing to do it. And these folks are the ones who actually have to say, okay, now, how am I going to do that? And we can talk about policy and everything, but in my opinion, this is the core problem that Mojaloop is trying to solve, is how do we get those costs down? And how do we get those costs down at scale when we're including the last mile? So JJ, George, and Nee, I've known you all for quite some time, actually, bizarrely JJ the least, but before we get into this, and I'd like to go ahead and give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. So JJ, if we can start with you.
Hi, Steve. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jean-Jacques Ajuga, usually called JJ. Everyone decided to call me JJ. It's easy that way. I work for R-Switch. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. I platform where we implementing the instant inclusive payment system. We went live with the first use case on the Mojaloop platform last month on P2B, and so far it's going very well. We've integrated with all payment service providers, banks, MFIs, and fintechs. And today we've been able to achieve interoperability of systems. As we dive now, get the work remaining to make this now adoption and usage to be a true reality in terms of inclusivity on instant payment system. Happy to join this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ. George.
Yeah, good morning. So my name is George Murage from Integrated Payment Services Limited in Kenya. We are better known by our brand name PesaLink. So I lead technology and operations for PesaLink, and I'm excited to be here. We've been looking at Mojaloop actually because of the whole equation of costs, cost and scale, and eventually the end user price to the consumer. Yeah, so excited.
Singaporean-based fintech. We've been in Mojaloop community since 2021. Steve mentioned about the accelerator program, and I would vouch for that because when we started in the Mojaloop community, we were the local system integrator working with Infotech's team, with Warren and his team, learning about Mojaloop. We took all the courses that Steve has shown. That's how we learned about Mojaloop. We got involved with the community, and now we've been implementing Mojaloop in different countries, right? In a partnership with African Lender, and contributing to Mojaloop back, right, to whatever that we can. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thanks, Steve. And I would say that process we went through with FitsWorks very early on is actually what drove a lot of the training program and the accelerator because of that experience we had. So let's say the experimental first graduates of the accelerator program. All right, so again, I want to get into some specific challenges that each of you either are already starting to see on your existing hubs? And so I want to say everyone, a lot of people know Nee from ThitsWorks as a system integrator who's actually implementing Mojoops, but also had experience running the hub in WinePay, where both of us actually kind of met and learned what Mojooloop was. And so I also want to tie into your experience from WinePay on this panel if we can. So as you've run hubs at different levels of transactions, when you hit scale, and what do you think are some of the biggest challenges in terms of stability, security, like the infrastructure costs that you're going to face? Like, so fundamentally the infrastructure costs as this scales, Mojoloop or not Mojoloop, like forget about that we're talking Mojoloop, just in general, if you're going to hit scale, hit every person in your country with every adult doing 1 or 2 transactions per day, what are your main infrastructure concerns and stability concerns? So JD, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Steve, for that question. To run an instant payment system, or to run a switch, let me call it that way, there are 3 aspects that you need to look at and have coordinated or orchestrated. To make sure transactions are moving in. And for this, you also need a second leg where you need operational interoperability. From operational, what I'm looking at transaction processing, I'm looking at dispute management portal, I'm looking at settlement, I'm looking at a clearing system where we need to settle. Then I'm looking at the business interoperability. I prefer to call it interoperability because we need a business model where scheme members sit together, discuss and agree. But now the scheme operator drive interoperability on an infrastructure. And this infrastructure is operated and managed by people. And we need to ensure high availability, and this involves having a robust infrastructure, having a scalable system, because from the switch, 1 transaction is equal to 1 million transactions. Why am I saying it's equal? The effort of processing a single transactions is equal to the effort of processing 1 million transactions from where we sit as a switch. So what it requires is we need to achieve velocity. To achieve velocity means we need an adoption at scale. Because that's why when I was saying we've been able to integrate everyone. You have all the banks, you have all the mobile money operators, but are we handling the full market share of transactions? Not yet. But we're still incurring that cost. You need a disaster recovery so that you really keep the system stable, reliable, and trustworthy. But how do we now make sure everyone come on board to now achieve that cost efficiency? Because you're already taking that cost, and to keep technology that is evolving every day, the investment keep on increasing. From an instant standpoint, another aspect also to note is the onboarding is an ongoing conversation, because participants, they don't come all of them at the same time. So you keep your project resources available, waiting for banks, mobile money operators, MFIs to come. So when you have all of them, the price, you pricing them will define what they will price also the end consumers. Key to also look at who decide on the price that will go to the end consumers, because at the switch or whoever is operating this system doesn't have control over that platform, but banks will decide on the cost in terms of how much they want to recover. And the lenses on which we are looking at for affordability or inclusiveness is not the same lenses that banks are looking at. So I'll pause there. But what I wanted to add here is to say, how do we make sure the lenses that we are looking at from stability, and the same stability is seen from a participant standpoint, then we look at it the same way so that the pricing is coordinated so that the end or last mile beneficiary of these services is not receiving it as a cost that is passed to him. So it's heavy, then it's top adoption and usage. Yeah. Thank you.
I think you bring up a good point is, yeah, that we've got these costs and you've got costs and the participant DFSPs have costs. And at some point, the DFSPs need to they want to make more money than that cost. And are you going to, is the solution to that is largely going to be a policy question. So I do want to call out that I think Wale is leading a session on policy, if I'm not correct. And there is a policy session of how policy can drive scale. So I hope everybody joins that workshop later. And we'll get into some of that a little bit as well. And I also want to get into the onboarding because we'll talk more about that as well. George, and I think Derek have been, you don't have to get into specifics, but really leading the way in terms of being advanced in how you think about keeping your infrastructure costs down and also scalable. Are you willing to talk about like, what are your views on how, and also you just came back from Las Vegas. I think probably the farthest person traveling, I'm sorry, is Lena. I think he actually traveled farther. What are are you willing to talk about how you guys are thinking about infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think infrastructure is one of those variable costs that go up with transactions. So ideally, you want to work with software that's optimized for a very small hardware footprint. When you look at, so we keep talking about transactions per second, but actually when you think about it, it's actually the payments per second, because one payment could involve multiple transactions. If you think about a transaction as an atomic API call. Yeah, so it's something that you need to look at because it's one of the barriers, and it doesn't matter whether you're running your infrastructure on premise, whether you're running it on the cloud. If you are going to run it at societal scale, so I was trying to run the numbers in Kenya, that means running services for 20 million people, there are about 20 million adults, and trying to do 20 million transactions a day, then you're going to have to be very selective about the software you choose to run these services. You're going to be very selective also about not just the platform, the switch itself, but there could be auxiliary systems around it, the ones doing fraud management, the ones doing dispute redressal, the ones doing things like a lot of payments are, at least in our part of the world, are driven by text messages. So at every leg, you get a text message. Are they able to scale with very, very small infrastructure footprint? And I think for us, we've seen both extremes. We've seen some that don't scale well, meaning the moment you get beyond a certain threshold of transactions, then you need this huge fleet of the infrastructure. And it doesn't make sense because if you're trying to arrive at an end-to-end cost of $0.01 per transaction as your base cost, then that doesn't work out very well. What we see works are platforms that are cloud native, platforms that are written with modern technology that's very, very small in terms of the footprint that they use, and platforms that are continually evolving with the understanding that for operators such as ourselves, we really need platforms that are very economical in terms of the juice they are taking up from an infrastructure point of view. And those I think we think are just set us up well for success because it's a big, 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 big cost to be able to put up the infrastructure that your country needs to be able to run those 20 million transactions a day. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, George. And I hope all of the engineers have been listening to that. I think we hope that Mojaloop has answered a lot of those questions, but we definitely haven't answered all of them. I want to call up an interesting point that you meant of, yeah, we talk about transactions per second of financial transactions per second, But we as the Mojib community and who work on the Mojib core need to remember that if the adjacent systems that we're connected to are a bottleneck, we need to make sure we're also working with that. And I mean, this is why we talked about the partner program with FNA, and we've got Tazama here. We partner with MOSIP, is that there's going to be other systems that we have to connect into, but we have to make sure that we connect to them in an efficient way, because in the end, you need 1,000 financial transactions per second, and we need to make sure we enable that in any way we can, even if it means working closely with adjacent software. So awesome, great point. Ni, same question. How can, especially because you had experience long before anybody else with Mojaloop with setting up WinePay, with very infrastructure cost conscious MFIs. What are your experiences with that?
For us, there was no question that we needed to consider a cloud infrastructure as the solution, because we were dealing with the financial institutions who were very cost sensitive, and the on-prem solution will not be able to provide them with the cost point that they can survive or they can sustain. So we went for the cloud-based approach, and the industry accepted it, and we were very lucky. So appeal to the regulators in the room is to please consider having the cloud infrastructure as a part of the solutions, right? I know that in some countries, the data residency requirements, privacy requirements may prohibit system implementers from using cloud, totally. But they are, perhaps part of the solutions could be hosted on cloud, and the critical data will be residing in on-prem in the country. I think there could be a number of combinations that we can look at. Because one of the challenges that we have with the infrastructure is most of the time we have the underutilized infrastructure. I wish we have the problem where there's a lot of TPS that we cannot support with the infrastructure. I think that would be a good problem to have, and we can always throw money at the hardware to catch up. But sometimes the problem that we have is that we have anticipated some transactions and we set up the infrastructure, but the volume does not catch up, and we are paying a lot for the servers that we are not using. I think that's where the challenge is, and cloud actually help us with that, because we can pay as we go, we can scale up if we need to. But if you are setting up the on-prem servers, it's very hard to do, right? So you need to invest very heavily upfront, and you may not get to the number of transactions that you need to recoup those investment.
Excellent point. And I think hopefully anyone working on infrastructure later on will think about how Mojaloop has tried to solve that, but I don't think we're 100% there. The next one I want to talk about is that's the hardware and the infrastructure that gives you a lot of the stability. But JJ, you mentioned about the kind of the operational costs. That's what I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into. And you mentioned two big ones. So the onboarding, which you said, yeah, it's an ongoing thing, because you're always going to have new financial institutions, but you're also having to constantly maintain the existing connections. I know I've just named off a few, but can you dig into a little bit more? What are the operational costs that keep you up, saying, how am I going to minimize this cost? This is gonna kill my business.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Operating, as I broken into three, operation, even from a structure standpoint, we have an operation department where you need a whole team looking at the system on a day-to-day to ensure settlement, reconciliations, and these are the team jointly working with the entire industry. But from a back-end standpoint, you have the team that is working on the infrastructure from an IT operation on a day-to-day basis. And then you also have team working on the fraud, because today fraud, cyber attack is really becoming frequent. Dealing with the social engineering and all that, you need people really to, and how much are we making to make sure that the team, we are able to absorb that cost? Realistically speaking, not yet, because it's The volume that we're expecting, we haven't yet. When you have the instant payment system, the modular load platforms, you build on it also a null array of systems. And we currently working on the Tazama, which is a fraud monitoring tool, which we also want to embed. Because when the platform is ready and it's live, you need to keep it maintained and scaled. All of this is cost. So to reduce the cost, I usually, what I'm saying is, I'm not looking at it from a reducing cost standpoint, because when the platform is established and you have a team that are able really to proactively do changes, maintain change requests, the heavy lift is more of on the onboarding. And at some point, once everyone is onboarded, it will be maintaining only. But the issue is more of on how do we achieve scale, so that whatever cost you have, you are absorbing it on how much you are making, and that we don't have control. That has a dependency now on the people we are onboarding, because when you're onboarded, the conversation is usually we are having conflicting priority, because we have 4 use cases on the instant payment that we are serving. You have a P2P, but the P2P is accessed through a channels that is maintained by the bank. We still have a market that is USSD led market, means our instant has to cater for. We need to do stamp customization to make sure we support the USSD, which is an overhead cost that is added to the platform from the switch where we need to support. But again, DFSP are the one bearing the cost of USSD, bearing the costs of supporting those channels. We still have a market where people access money through agency. Agency will be supported on the instant payment. From the switch or located at the central, we don't onboard agent. Someone is doing the onboarding. Someone is managing the platforms. Someone is paying that commission. But why am I bringing this? And it's a challenge I'm throwing to the entire community here, is how do we work closely with bank first to size this cost? Because sometimes DFSP hide behind this cost to overprice the citizens. Because if we work with the policymakers, we work with the regulator, central bank in the houses, the pricing that is usually set, it's usually not a price that is sized properly. So you've put an infrastructure, you've connected everyone, you have an interoperable system, but it's not used. It's actually ending up benefiting the DFSPs, because we have big players who are actually driving the conversation. We have a market where we have monopolistic players, mobile money operators, big banks. The price that is on the market is the price that they decide. And as I said before, we have different lenses. They look at making money from their shareholder. We are looking at empowering and including. How do we orchestrate it so that we have the same agenda? I submit.
Thanks, JJ. 10,000 things I would love to talk about, but you touched on a point that's so hot for me right now, which is cost transparency. And not just when we talk about cost, also not the cost only in terms of money, but even things like disputes and failed transactions. I mean, one of the things we talk about very often is the operational cost and the challenge of failed transactions. And I mean, I know a lot of your countries that have talked to a lot of you, and a lot of you have talked to me in private about the number of failed transactions at your IPS, but no one talks about it publicly. And I think this is a challenge that we as a community, I hope we can address, is until we can actually talk publicly about what these costs are. And so my call out to the community, the SIs, everybody, and the people supporting these projects is, let's get more transparent about our costs, because that's the only way I think we're going to bring the price down from a policy perspective. So thank you for calling that out. George, while we're running low on time, I'd like to talk, because we talked about a lot of a variety of costs at the platform and also the DFSPs. We started talking because you were interested in new use cases. So the cost of the onboarding is then also, even once you add a new use case, that's a new cost to all of your participants. Can you talk about that cost of the cost of evolution and the cost of maintenance of the platform itself? Also because in our, I think one of our first group meetings in Nairobi, you gave me like a very amazing speech about the doing everything locally that I thought, like, yeah, I still go back to with chills. If you can talk about some of those issues that concern you of how do I keep the maintenance costs down? How do I keep my platform evolution costs down?
Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. Thank you. Yeah, so I think for us, one of the things we obsess about is just the cost of the innovation journey. And I think they fall in roughly two buckets. So if you're using proprietary software, you're always paying for whatever change it is upfront, regardless of whether you've achieved product market fit, whether you've achieved scale, but you pay upfront, and then after X or Z period of time, you're paying maintenance for a feature that you built or that you paid for, regardless of whether you have one person using it per month or whether you have 100,000 people using it. So one of the things that we are seeking to change is to bring some of those pieces of technology in-house, either by leveraging open source technologies, or some of them we build them ourselves, because it's fundamental. Because you always want to be very conscious about where your costs are going to, and if this is going to become sustainable. And even for some of the vendors that we work with, we've just told them that, I can't be the one risking everything. And for you, you are a partner of mine, but you risk nothing. So obviously, what we do see happening worldwide is that a lot of other operators are either building on an open source platform, like Mojalu, or the journey started a lot earlier. So they just built their own intellectual property, and that's what they're building on. And then obviously the other one is just that for us, we have a big emphasis on using our people, our resources. And again, it's just cost of engineering. The cost you pay for an engineer in Kenya is not the same that you would pay in Europe or in the US or in other parts of the world. And then that knowledge is gonna stay. It's more durable, it's more sustainable. So yeah, we are a bit fixated about it, but it's because it allows us to have a deeper understanding of our customer, a deeper understanding of the engineering, and we can change it at relatively low cost, and we can change it at have a relatively high velocity of change because we are adapting to the market. When it's overseas, first of all, it's foreign currency dominated, so you don't really control it. You don't really control FX, even though our countries really try to control it. So you're not really in control. What you pay last year, what you're going to pay next year is not really predictable. When it's local, it is, because even if it's increasing in local currency terms. So yeah, that's why we are we're very keen on making sure that Kenyans are involved in our journey. Yeah, we will use external help, not to say that we are close to external help, but for sustainability is to try and see what talent, what capabilities can we get in Kenya and the larger East Africa region, because engineers cost the same in the larger East Africa region, yeah, than trying to go overseas for the same talent and for the same capability. Yeah.
Thank you, George. And I was hoping we would talk more, sorry, but I did want to ask Vice, because he and I had a great conversation earlier. What did we miss? What are some of the things that you think, as a hub operator in the Philippines, what are some of the things that you think we've missed in terms of keeping costs down?
Hey, thank you, Steve. Okay, there are two things in a payment system. So you have the payment operator or the payment hub operator, and you have the DFSPs. No? So if you want to manage cost, you need to manage cost on both sides. Now, in our experience, complying with like regulatory requirements costs a lot. One, you need, for example, like the DFSPs are required to implement transaction monitoring systems to be able to address, fraud and money laundering transactions. Second, they're required to put up like a redress mechanism for customers to address, concerns. Recently, there was a draft regulation that our central bank has issued requiring now the payment hub operator to also implement the same, systems, real-time transaction monitoring system and redress, mechanism system. So these are actually, technically increasing our cost. And here's the killer. There was a draft regulation that was issued by the regulator requiring all participants to render the service for free. Right? So we're being asked to increase our cost, to invest more, and we're being asked to give it away for free. So how do we manage it? So it's really a big question. So I don't know, maybe it's a way it's time for us to rethink the business model. Maybe it's I was looking at some cases like PhonePe in UPI, where the operators are not allowed by the central bank to charge fees, but they make money somewhere else. Use data to, do credit score, provide, credit, insurance, savings, and investment. Maybe those are the things. In the Philippines, for example, in the last 5 years, there was a research shared by the central bank that says people are now opening accounts not to save money, but to make or receive payments. 80% of them, number one reason, payments. So if you're a financial institution and you don't participate in a payment system, you're losing out customers. But if you participate, you have to invest. But you cannot charge fees. So these are the things that, keeps, players in our market, awake at night. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vice. All right, and that's all the time we have. I would love to talk to everybody about this, but we've got the whole week to talk about what are your biggest cost concerns. So JJ, George, and Nee, thank you so much for joining us on stage, and I will pass it back over to Simeon.